Thanks for joining our webinar today. Our topic today is securing cloud assets, which is a super important focus area for security. It's one that's been ignored for far too long by many companies, especially smaller companies. And what we want to do is cover that today and talk about the various areas of cybersecurity that are deployed to secure your cloud assets. We have eSecurity Solutions, myself, Tom Ruffolo, CISA. I will cover the introduction to the topic, and then we have Bill Monroe, who's the Senior Director of Product Marketing at WatchGuard. So now, what is cloud security? What are the real challenges? First, there are three areas to protect in cloud security, right? And that's the first thing to really think about, is that there's the private public cloud. There's all your data and your servers that go into the cloud, and that is a new challenge, and they should be protected the same as if they were on-prem. And then you've got remote workers, and we've beaten that to death. It's been ever since COVID, you've had to face it, and you probably have faced it and then feel like you've kind of done what you're going to do. And maybe now that COVID's over and we're moving forward, maybe it's a time to kind of think that through a little more thoroughly. And then there's applications that are in the cloud. And there's a bunch of them. We're going to talk about it in a minute. All of this stuff used to be on premise, and the cloud assets are easier to attack and harder to protect. So that's really the bad news about moving everything cloud. It's easier to use, might be cheaper to maintain, might be cheaper to acquire, but it is easier to attack and harder to protect because it's addressable directly over the internet. And it presents more attack targets, and that's the bad. Those are two very bad things that have to be solved at some level that you're comfortable with. So if we just look at remote workers, I've actually split this up into two concepts, right? One of them is that there are two missions, right? One of them is protecting the company from the remote worker, and then the other part is protecting the users, right? And most people think of protecting the users as being the focus, like, well, we don't really, there's really not that big of a deal. They don't do that much at home. Maybe they don't store that much at home. Okay, but the real problem and challenge for companies and for all of you is how do you protect the company? And you want to protect the corporate servers and data. You want to protect the cloud applications and data. We're talking primarily data, right? And you're storing this stuff on remote servers, servers that are not controlled by you. And in the case of remote workers, also there's data stored at remote sites. So there's that little hard drive attached to the back, or maybe it's on the computer, or maybe it's on some local computer or server data storage at home. Those are all very realistic things. And we found our users sometimes storing stuff locally, and then you're horrified to find out that they're storing stuff locally instead of back where it came from, right? And that is a horrible, especially if that ends up being your new original version of the data for a spreadsheet or something that's critical to the company. These are very, very realistic issues. Now, the solutions for this are fairly broad, right? You need EDR type solutions to protect the workstations. You need these new SASE, secure access service edge type solutions like ZTNA and DLP, firewalls as a service, software gateway as a service. Those are all the new stuff that protect the migrating data that goes out into the cloud. But you still need things like email security and MFA and MDR. These are all core ingredients. And MDR is really how do I monitor everything that's going on at a global level. So these are all very important concepts as it relates to remote workers. And you can tell, you can look at that and try to assess where you're at in that journey. Second area was cloud application data. I mean, there's a ton of cloud applications out there. I listed a few. There's a bunch of them, and a lot of these are financial, right? Like payroll, accounting, bank accounts, and even just like CRM data on your customers. But the financial stuff's the stuff you're really worried about. And we at one time, like 10 years ago, we had somebody got access to our payroll account, and the next thing I knew, they had created a new worker that didn't exist here with a electronic payment information, and had I run another payroll, they would have gotten paid. This is very, very dangerous stuff. And so, you know, the threats are the lack of visibility. It's like, what apps are your people in your company using? Are they approved apps? You know, these are corporate approved apps. Do you want to try to control that? Are there unauthorized users, which is really what the problem, probably the biggest risk to anything is, you know, how seriously are you controlling access to these applications? Is it two-factor authentication? Is it three-factor authentication? Whatever it is, you can't do too much when it comes to cloud applications, because if anybody gets in, all bets are off. Data leakage to unauthorized apps. So are you getting data that's going to an app that people shouldn't be using, and the data is migrating out to those? Are they using unsafe applications? Are you regulation non-compliant if you need to be regulated? The biggest solutions for this are SASE type applications like CASB, which gives you visibility, usage control, and DLP. Those are three very important things that you get from a CASB type solution. And MFA, obviously, at some level from somewhere, that actually works on all of these applications, and maybe even unifying that into a unified single login where you can access all of that from one place. It's super secure though. Last one is really private and public clouds. People use all of these clouds and more. The threats are things like network attacks, server malware attacks, data breaches. Misconfiguration is a big deal, because if anything's misconfigured, then it could open up holes into access, or just security holes itself, and access control itself. You know, controlling access to these things. These data, private and public clouds, provide servers and data storage, but they use a shared responsibility model that says that they are responsible for their infrastructure. You are responsible for yours, and for your data. That means for your servers and your data, you are responsible. So are you doing enough? And just because it's like out of sight, out of mind, is it being protected properly? Things like risk assessments, where a third party comes in, like eSecurity comes in, and we assess where your gaps are. That can be helpful in determining where you might have the biggest risks. Virtual firewalls, workload protection, MFA to secure access. SASE provides ZTNA, so zero trust access from your employees to the data that you've got up there, and gives you granular control. CSPM solutions, which provides a cloud security posture management, that provide visibility, monitoring, response automation, misconfiguration detection, compliance assurance, and also work cross-platform. Like if you have something in AWS and Azure and Google Cloud, it can work across that. Backup disaster recovery, always super important, and then managed detection and response to monitor your entire infrastructure. So those are the three areas that we want to focus, and each one of those deserves a lot of scrutiny. This is a slide that Bill gave me, so I didn't make it, but what it does is emphasize that there are different solutions, and every one of them has a different set of protections, and there isn't much overlap. And there's more stuff beyond this, right? But if you had, firewalls in there, virtual firewalls, there's another set of solutions that are provided. It might overlap with firewalls as a service, but they're protecting different things. So keep in mind that people often ask, well, if I have this, do I need this? And the answer is probably yes, because most security solutions, if they're different controls, provide different solutions that are all important, and presumably important to you if you've done a risk assessment and you've determined that. So with that, I want to turn it over to Bill, who is going to give the WatchGuard perspective.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tom, and appreciate everyone being here. And I'm gonna take what Tom talked about and dig down a layer, kind of go into some of the definitions in more detail, and then talk to at least what at WatchGuard we believe are the starting places in this. Because as Tom went through, there's a lot of tech that can be deployed to secure these cloud environments and these remote workers. So the question becomes, where do I start? And what are the first places? And I'll take a click on the slide, Tom. So let's start. Okay, let's start with some definitions, because SASE is not a solution. SASE is a bunch of different things, and what you deploy of those different things really depends on the use cases that you're trying to solve. SASE, the whole term was created by Gartner back in 2019, and it's because Gartner recognized this cloud and remote environment challenge that was going to be out there, and that there wasn't a single solution and a single magic quadrant that would cover it. So they did their best to define a bunch of different pieces that would come in and solve this. And when we look at them, right, the first thing, I don't know, the numbering got mucked up, but the first thing there is firewall as a service. So if you think about your world and you have your on-prem environment and you have your firewalls protecting that environment, the moment a worker goes remote and works outside of that network protected environment, it's like you took all their firewalls away. Well, the good news is that there are lots of solutions out there that will, and they usually fall into the SASE category, that are basically a firewall as a service wrapped around that remote user. I'm going to show you what that looks like. And another piece that goes with firewall as a service is a secure web gateway. Again, when you're on the network, you've got these controls in place. But when a user goes remote, now they can go and access anywhere on the internet and do anything. And this creates many of the threats that Tom talked about, and we'll go into a little more detail on. Of course, VPNs are very common. A lot of people have them, but a VPN alone isn't really a good security solution, because it can be used by the attacker just as effectively as it can be used to hide a browser, an IP, and hide the communications going on. Because if an attacker compromises a device, a user's device remotely, they can use that VPN to tunnel right into the organization and have pretty much unlimited access to attack. And that happened in the Circle CI attack. That also happened in the SolarWinds attack. Then software-defined wide area networks, SD-WAN, and there's many of these solutions out there. And this is a little different type of problem that you're solving than purely cloud and remote worker. This is really that small office, that remote office that you may have, maybe if you're a doctor's office or you're a retailer, and you want a way to connect that office into this secure environment without putting firewalls and a lot of network infrastructure. Well, the fact is you can actually create a software-defined network, and when you wrap it in that firewall as a service and that secure web gateway, once again, SASE has come up with 3 products together that give you the same advantage of protecting that site as if it were a traditional network. So it's an option, it's more flexible and scalable, and in many cases, depending on the bandwidth of data you've got flowing, it can actually be less expensive. Zero trust is another common term you hear out in the market today, and there's multiple types of zero trust. There's zero trust within the network environment on-prem. There's zero trust within the cloud environment. Here, what we're talking about is zero trust, assuming that the remote users coming in to that on-prem environment need to be brought in with a level of access control and higher authentication to create that trust environment. And so these zero trust products are put into place to take that remote worker and move them into an on-prem environment with an extra layer of security so that we know it's not an attacker, and limited access so that we know that if it is a compromised machine, they can't get at the crown jewels very easily. And then finally, Tom talked to the cloud access security brokers. These are fairly sophisticated technologies. You'll hear data loss prevention. If you're thinking of traditional on-premise data loss prevention, this is somewhat different. It's data moving in and around the cloud. But as Tom spoke to, it's very simple for a remote worker to download stuff from the cloud, keep it on their remote machine, suddenly have it go up into their Google personal account and sync, or their OneDrive account and sync, and suddenly now you've lost that data. And so these are controls that get into the cloud application level and give you better ability to secure that environment. Those controls also exist within many of the cloud service organizations, Amazon, etc. And so it just depends on the strategy that you want to use to bring these pieces to bear. And we'll talk a little more about the use cases, so hopefully it makes sense. But at a high level, those are all the pieces and what they mean. So let's talk about the two use cases that we think are a great place to start. And the reason for that is because this is where we see the greatest amount of risk. And if you look at attacks over the last 24 months, these are two areas where they were very common. The first is to think about those remote workers accessing public environments. And that can mean your public cloud infrastructure that you use, your Googles, your Salesforces, your M365. But it's more than that, because when that user is working from home, they're working on their home Wi-Fi. I don't know the last time an average user patched their routers on their home Wi-Fi. And I don't know how good, they're not very good, the different Verizons and AT&Ts are at making sure they're patching their stuff too, which means that their personal home internet environment, especially if they live in crowded cities, may not be very secure. We know that we all have to, when we travel, work in public Wi-Fi environments, airports, hotels, etc. That also is very insecure. And so there's a lot of threats, and I'm going to dig into the threats so you understand them in a moment. But the real critical solutions for that remote worker accessing something public are firewall as a service, software gateway, and VPN, because that basically takes the network environment they used to work in premise, and it wraps it around them no matter where they are. And there are some very specific things that a SASE solution will do in distributing the traffic so that you don't have the limitations of VPN. You're not back routing all that traffic back on-prem and having to throw a lot of hardware to do it. And so there's some significant advantages to usability with this firewall, software gateway, and VPN mix in a SASE solution, and there's significant cost reductions. The bigger point, though, is this is also an area of really great threats, because many, many people, and we saw some of it in the polling, have no real protections out there or have VPN only. And it is a place where we know attackers are targeting. The other use case to talk about is when those remote workers need to come on site into the environment, something we could call private access. We need to make sure that those users can go from their machine in a secure way into the on-prem environment with the very sensitive data and not easily be able to move it back and store it locally, move it up to the cloud, etc. So it's a little different use case, securing a little different area, but it is a critical use case because every attacker who compromises an endpoint, their goal is to get into the network environment. And so here it's those same three, but then we add that zero trust network access, specifically adding layers of application and access control and stronger authentication that are going to secure that user and make sure we understand who that user is coming into that on-prem environment. And there's a specific handshake between the network gateways and the application or the agent that's running on the device that assures that security. And I'll take another slide, please.
Sure.
So if we dig down, so the other piece, and Tom spoke to this, is beyond a SASE solution. And if you go, God bless the SASE solution vendors who just do SASE because their job is to push their product. But the simple truth is a SASE solution alone does not solve this problem. And what's important to understand is, as Tom spoke to, you still must protect that device. And that means EDR, endpoint detection and response, or endpoint protection of some type. We'll talk a little bit about that. The next is you still have to protect your user, and that means their credentials. And this is a place where a lot of companies are challenged with getting a real multi-factor system out in play that will protect the identities of these users, because once that identity is compromised and that attacker owns that user's identity, all of the other defenses have to work extra hard to find that attack is there. And the challenge is that that can fail. So multi-factor authentication, critically important here. And then there's another approach Tom alluded to that I just wanted to introduce the concept, and that is we think about our firewalls around our perimeters, but there are cloud firewalls, and the cloud firewalls actually deploy, and if you know Firebox from WatchGuard, we have one of these, and you actually deploy it in your cloud perimeter and protect that cloud environment. And that secures the cloud infrastructure and the workload from the internet. So it's interesting because if you think about what you're trying to do here in terms of use cases, you've got to protect your device, you've got to protect your credential, you got to protect the communications of that device to the internet, one part of SASE. You got to protect the communications from that device into the network, the second part of SASE. And then you have to protect the cloud environment, and cloud firewalls do a wonderful job at that. And so that's another piece you can dig into. And oh, by the way, I love the graphic. I know everyone here knows this, but the cloud's nothing special. It's just a giant server farm sitting out in the middle of a field in Ohio that all your stuff's being routed to. So let's take a step back and talk about the threats in 2 slides here. And everyone here knows this, right? The problem is how we work change, how we all do business change. It's not that there are new types of attacks. It's not that vendors are creating things to force on you to sell you new products. It's that we had a shift in how business was being done, and we have to change how we keep it secure. And we know that the threats wrap around, mostly around a remote user and the really risky things that they do. And I can tell you, if you go back and you look at our managed service and the audits that are out there, and you ask Tom and our other partners, the number one problem we're seeing right now is online gambling in the United States has become huge, and remote workers do it all the time. And if you don't have some sort of secure web gateway on there, they're doing it. But as we talked about, they also work in unsecure areas. We also know that for every account they have on their machine, they've got a OneDrive or a Google Drive that's their personal, that is really easy to deploy and back up all of that sensitive information into their private cloud if you don't have any protections watching that. There's also misconfiguration that Tom talked to, and that primarily leads to overprivilege. And that means that when an attacker owns a machine or owns an identity, that overprivilege just makes it really easy for them to get in and land that ransomware attack or land the data theft that they want to do. And finally, I'm sure all of you have gone in and worked within an M365 admin environment or a Google admin environment or an AWS admin environment. They're not simple. This is not simple stuff. And the attackers know this. So this is an area they target because they know there's going to be gaps there. In the survey polls with those answers, I think all of you recognize this also. So what kind of attacks land, right? Well, we know on the endpoint, phishing is still one of the major attacks that are going out there. It's still, that and vulnerabilities are the two that are coming up again and again in the Verizon data breach report, in our own investigations, that are the top 2 ways people are getting attacked. But we also consistently see different types of ransomware attacks. We consistently see the Trojans and the rootkits that are out there. There is multiple new generations of fileless attacks. Fileless malware attacks just mean that an AV system is not going to pick it up. A basic endpoint protection system is not going to see these types of attacks, nor are they likely to see vulnerabilities. That takes a little more sophisticated endpoint tool. We'll talk about it. And then, of course, internet activity, when your users out there on the gambling sites and other sites they shouldn't be, you're going to see them open themselves up to threats from infected websites, browser downloads, infected file downloads, and even unsanctioned usage of their personal devices. All of those things create threats. On the platforms themselves, when your users actually up accessing the cloud environment, we see a lot of people just ignore the VPNs, turn them off if they have that ability. We see them open that up to man-in-the-middle attack, session hijacking, DNS spoofing, redirecting them to a fake cloud account. That's starting to grow again. But we also see cloud environments being attacked directly without the user involved. And then finally, we talked about identity compromise. Once that identity is compromised, that user through phishing, through brute force password attacks, that attacker now has the ability to really do damage. And all of these other systems are going to be second and third line defenses. So I always go back to multi-factor authentication, getting that out to absolutely as many people as you can in your organizations. is like critical step number one. And Tom pointed this out, and I'll remind you of it. Attackers are trying to get to your endpoint remote users so they can get into your network. That's their goal. So how did all of that stuff map to the defenses we talked about? Well, EDR for the endpoint, right? And we talked about internet and cloud. Those are your SASE, your strong authenticate, or your SASE, your firewall as a service, gateway, and VPN. And then finally, strong authentication on the identity side. So let's dig into these and talk about them a little bit. I'm going to talk about them in terms of WatchGuard, but I'm going to talk about them in terms of the things that you should be making sure your solutions, when you choose them, have. And so EDR has come a long way in the past 20 years. I mean, from the initial antivirus tools that were out there from McAfee and Symantec, who are gone, or at least rolled into something else, to Cylance, kind of reinventing AI in the endpoint to where we are today. A good endpoint tool should look across 4 specific areas of activity, right, and action. The first is the agent itself needs to be secure. That's cyber hygiene. How is that agent working such that it's not easily attacked or shut off? A lot of ransomware attacks, their first thing they attempt to do is shut the endpoint agent off so that they can quickly infiltrate the organization. And being able to know when tampering is happening to it, to have anti-tampering coding built into it, to be able to see if that tampering is occurring and have the agent fail positive or report back, to be able to watch that end machine and have all the communications encrypted back and forth, to be able to patch. Yes, now actually good endpoint tools will have their own patch management tool for the things operating on the endpoint. And that includes your browsers to notify if a patch isn't there that should be, and there's a vulnerability, and alert you to what needs to be changed. The next side is the more traditional AV, right? It's the prevention. It's having the signatures against the most up-to-date types of attacks, having anti-phishing and network attack protection built into it. And now a good EDR tool will actually give you whitelisting and blacklisting capabilities to do some level of application blocking. So it expands, all of these are expanding in their capabilities. Then there's the detection and part of this, right? In the EDR, endpoint detection and response. The detection and response piece comes up with how do you monitor those environments using different types of machine learning and AI so you understand indicators of compromise, stages of attacks outside of a signature, and being able to recognize those. That's your best defense against one of these fileless malware attacks, because even they do certain things that you can model and say, ooh, that's not a good thing. And having the ability to investigate, to go into that endpoint quickly and recognizing what is happening. At the moment that you go from prevention to detection, right, you're now, the clock is ticking and you're trying to beat the attacker and find a point that you can block them ahead of them, or ahead of them getting past you and getting into the defenses. And that's where response comes in. So having multiple types of response options, quarantining the endpoint device from the internet, isolating it completely out of the network, shutting it off and restarting it, being able to take an agent and reinstall it remotely, shut it off and reinstall it remotely, and being able to go into that agent and go in as a remote shell and be able to pull data out so that you can understand what's happening and investigate quickly to see if that attack is spread. So from the original AV to where we are today, you now have this broad set of capabilities in the EDR tools, and they are set to defend against these modern attacks, especially in remote environments. The answer, or the question to ask here is, what do you have on the endpoints of these remote workers, and does it need to be updated to a more modern EDR type system? Something that's a good question to ask, even if it's just on those remote workers. Now let's dig into SASE a little bit, and let's talk about that environment and what it does, right? And so as we talked about, SASE is firewall as a service, secure web gateway, and that VPN. And this is specifically the SASE that's covering those 2 use cases we talked about. And here I'm going to add in that there has to be a layer of user authentication, which means your MFA and your SASE, if they have a handshake integration, which if you buy them from the same vendor, they will, that's a real advantage because there's a second layer of check on the identity of that endpoint. And then finally, how do you manage this environment, which I'm going to speak to. But what's in these pieces? Well, it's all the stuff you have in your firewall: DNS filtering, botnet detection, IPS, AT blocking in a sandbox environment so you can fire off executables and code, TLS inspection, the ability to understand location and block based on it, and antivirus gateway. And then, of course, secure web gateway we know is going to do our URL filtering and our application control. And then the authentication is really the authentication of that user and that device into the SASE environment. And when you look at tools like this, the management side of it is really, really important. How do you set the policies up? How do you roll out those endpoints? How do you integrate into that authentication environment? How do you make sure you've got an easy way to link what's happening in your remote device from your SASE view to your endpoint view to your authentication view? It's all really critical. When you look at a vendor that offers multiple pieces, there are significant advantages over looking at independent vendors. So it's something that when you're out there looking at your use case, make sure you ask the question about, hey, show me how you roll out an agent. How do you configure policies for that? How do you set up users, etc.? Really important to understand. Multi-factor authentication, I think everyone understands this technology. The challenge is how do you effectively roll it out to get all your users using it? And the big piece that supports that is having very different types of ways to implement it to get as many users into a way that's comfortable for them. So whether it's a mobile app or a hardware token, whether it's SSO within a laptop that allows you to do it and make it very simple, or whether it's through some sort of an application single sign-on portal, right? However you do it, you want to find a way to make authentication as easy for the user as possible. But even authentication has expanded now because now we know that it's very simple to dark web scan and see if an identity is compromised on the dark web. So that should be part of your authentication system. And then finally, it should also have a nice, easy central management environment. The more you're challenged with different environments to manage, the more complex all these solutions get. And our SASE is already complex because it's multiple solutions put together. Finally, look for how they're managed. I spoke to this, right? But the company you buy this from, like WatchGuard, has a single central management environment. This is a real winner because it's going to allow you to set up consistent policies, overlapping policies, easy to manage user groups into those policies. Because when you're dealing with remote workers, you've got the problem of, I've got 15 over here, I got 10 over here, I got 8 over here. The roles are mixed all across them. And so there's complexity in just figuring out how you're going to set these users up, what access you're going to give them, and how you're going to authenticate them. Once you get to that level, the more you can bring this all together in a single interface, the more you can deploy it all together from a single interface, the more the license management is from a single interface, and the more all of the reporting and views around threats and management and risk and usage are all in a single use face. That makes your life really easy. And the beautiful thing about these types of tools like the WatchGuard Cloud is it gives you a nice central place to do all of your policy management, to manage what's being sent out, to manage your enforcement, and to manage your reporting. Real value. I know if you are a WatchGuard Firebox user, you may still work in our WSM interface, but I would tell you that to really get the full benefit of the different products and solutions that we bring to market, shifting over to the WatchGuard Cloud is a win. And you'll see that when you look into our SASE interface to set up policies, it's exactly the same as the firewall policies. So it's really simple to figure out how you're going to roll them out across both areas and make sure they work strongly together.
Actually, I want to go back to a prior slide.
Sure.
WatchGuard is rolling out right now this WatchGuard Fire Cloud solution. It's a brand new product that's a firewall as a service. It's secure web gateway as a service. It provides localized firewall capabilities for your remote workers. And Bill, why don't you add just a little bit to that about what you're rolling out now and how people can get access to that?
Yeah, sure. So we're rolling this out in two pieces. The first piece we launched in March. Thank you, Tom. I appreciate that. It was a big launch for us. And it is specifically called FireCloud Internet Access. And it is a way to protect remote workers accessing that cloud environment. And then come August timeframe, we're going to beta, and then in September launch another version of it, which will be bundled together, which is called private access, which solves that second use case of bringing people into the on-prem environment. This is a great solution if you've got remote workers and they're primarily working in that cloud environment and you are doing nothing or you are doing VPN. It's simple to deploy, deploys right out of the WatchGuard cloud, works in conjunction with the WatchGuard endpoint and the WatchGuard authentication environment, works in conjunction with SAML. So if you're using different authentication, it's very easy to create that secure handshake that I talked about. And it is lightweight and it is very extreme. The other thing about it that's interesting is we have created an infrastructure of access points, we call points of presence, all around the world. So that means if you're doing VPN today and you're tracking all of that data back through your on-prem environment, you can now distribute it in these secure clouds. So if you look at this diagram, you have that remote worker on the left side, you have that little FireCloud symbol, that's the POP. What we actually do is we deploy the firewall and the gateway inside that access point, and it secures all of the interactions between the SaaS applications and the internet and that user. And we have an on-prem agent, an agent in that machine that secures and authenticates that user into that environment. The whole thing works in the cloud, 100%. There's no hardware to deploy. It's really cool tool, and people who are deploying it love it. So I would get with Tom if this is interesting to you and run a trial. It's very simple to run, and I know you're going to like it because we're getting rave reviews on it.
Yeah.
And the other piece it does is give you amazing visibility into what's happening on that endpoint, usage by that user, as well as risks and threats.
Right. And so eSecurity Solutions can facilitate that. So the next question is, how do you get access to it? The eSecurity Solutions sales reps can help you with that by getting that for you. We also can manage those solutions if you were to want us to do that as well. I just wanted to quickly cover, so eSecurity Solutions and WatchGuard were two different companies. Presumably you people know that, and many of you already work with us. eSecurity Solutions is here to be your single source security solution provider, providing GRC services like risk assessments, risk management, compliance type services, security products like from WatchGuard. We are a top WatchGuard partner, and also managed detection response and managed product security. And we try to help customers on their journey, right? So our mission is to help you on your journey, whether it be compliance focused or strong security or just basic solutions. We're here to help identify what your goals are, help you plot that journey, and then help you acquire those solutions and manage them and monitor them, whatever is appropriate for you and your company. And we work with the leading vendors in the industry. Next steps is logically would be at some level, let us help assess your risk. We can do that formally or we can do it informally, help prioritize your gaps, define the solutions that are prioritized as well, help define your security roadmap. What is your plan to get from where you are to where you're going, and then help you implement and manage them as appropriate, right? So we're your partner. We're here to help you do what you want us to do, but we're also here to help guide you and manage things as they go throughout the journey here, help you at each step. Just to summarize, so again, the WatchGuard's rolling out this new FireCloud product, and it's one that we can help you understand by doing a deep dive. By the way, he's got an entire deep dive presentation on this. We did not do it, and he was nice enough sort of not to do it because we were covering the broader topic. But there is a very deep dive presentation on this. We can show you or demo certain aspects of it. We can help you evaluate it. Those are all things that we'd love to be able to do. Or more importantly, from my point of view, we'd love to help guide you in your journey and be your security partner to figure out what you need and then define that and then help you acquire that and possibly manage those solutions as well. So we're really here to help you solve problems. If this is one of them, we'd love to help you solve that.
SASE is not a single solution. It is a journey. And you can deploy one or two components of SASE and leave giant gaps. So the notion of, hey, I need to solve this cloud environment problem, this remote worker environment problem, because they are creating risk of attack for me, then that's the journey you take with Tom. And you don't worry as much about the security solutions. That's what he's expert at. What you need to go through is really define where the risks are, work with him to define those, and then he'll come in with the expertise to put the best solution in for what you need. And that's really the SASE strategy.
That's super important, right? You have a finite budget, and that the whole value of doing some kind of a risk assessment is to determine where your top gaps are. If you're looking at the whole big picture, where your top gaps are, what the top solutions are that you need, and then figuring out how you can acquire solutions to fit in that budget. If you don't do that, you may end up overspending on things and not having as good a security as you should. So it's like anything else. You need to have a plan. Security is no different than that, and that's really what we want to help. We want to focus on in being your partner. So, and thank you very much for attending. We will be having another webinar in June, and you'll be getting a notice from Rebecca on that fairly shortly. So look forward to seeing you then. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Tom.